Noah's Ark, a gigantic tub of animals floating in the terrible waters of a worldwide flood. Have you ever wondered how Noah did it? Because on the surface, it doesn't really seem possible. How could so many animals fit on a boat? How could a boat that big be made out of wood? Is there even proof of a worldwide flood? Well, if you stay with us, we'll be answering all of those questions and more. So let's get on with the video. The first question we will be answering is, how was the ark built? And in order to answer that question, we must know what time period and what technology was used to build boats in that time. And the Bible gives us several hints on what technological period Noah was in. The Bible tells us that before Noah there was already a common language, they knew what days and years were, and there were even records. But that's not all. We have sewing, pelts, farming, shepherding, tents, musical instruments, and even cities. But that's all many years before Noah comes into the scene. By the time Noah comes around, we also have boats, measurements, vineyards, and alcoholic wine. But our most important hint is found in Genesis chapter 4 verse 22. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron. In other words, in the time of Tubal-Cain, about 3164 BC, bronze and ironworking was just emerging. But we can reasonably assume that by the time Noah is born, bronze and ironworking was already a widely adopted technology. Therefore, we can tell Noah was in the Bronze Age and probably used Bronze Age tools and technology. But he could have also been in the Iron Age, seeing that iron emerged at the same time as bronze, but for simplicity's sake, let's just go with the Bronze Age. Now that we know that Noah probably lived in the Bronze Age, what kind of Bronze Age technology would allow him to build a giant boat? First, he would need the wood to build the structure, which would lead him to cut down trees. To cut down a tree, he would have used a bronze axe or bronze saw. To save labor and time, he could cut down the trees on the build site. That way, he wouldn't need to move the logs very far when building the ark. In the case that he didn't have any trees on the build site, how would he be able to move them? Well, he could carry the logs with some help from his sons, or even push the logs on smaller logs like wheels. This strategy has been used throughout history. But humans weren't always the ones pulling the logs. Instead of manpower, Noah could have also used animal power like cows or horses. And if he was building on the coast or near a river, he could have used water to ease the load of moving the logs. Also a strategy that has been used throughout history. After that, he would need to lift some of the wood to the top of the 51-foot tall ship. Using some scaffolding, he could carry it up to the top, or with a little bit of ingenuity, he could have made a simple crane. One type of crane he could have used is a lever-powered crane. Levers can help reduce the amount of force needed by increasing the amount of time it takes to move the object. As you can see here, the lever is even on both sides. But if you move the fulcrum or adjust where the weight is, less weight can be used to lift more weight. In other words, less force can be used to move something heavy. Using a lever, you can lift just about anything if the structure is strong enough. Because of this, wooden levers don't really work on a large scale because the beam can break if the load is too heavy or if the beam is too long. To get to 51 feet, we'll need something a little stronger. By attaching a rope to the weight or to the wood and throwing that rope over a structure, then by manpower or animal power pulling on that rope, you could raise the wood. And if we get a little bit more advanced, he could have added pulleys or even gears to the crane. Like levers, pulleys and gears reduce the amount of force needed by increasing the amount of time and distance it takes to move the object. Though they were not necessary, it would have made the job easier and faster. Now that we can move the wood, how do we attach the wood together? Noah could have used bronze or wooden pegs with some glue made from animal hide. He could use the glue to fill in the gaps and keep the nails from moving. Speaking of wood, what kind of wood did Noah use? Well, in Genesis chapter 6 verse 14, God says to Noah, "Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood." The Bible tells us that the boat was to be made of gopher wood, but nobody knows for sure what gopher wood was. Most people believe that gopher wood was cypress due to it being used in the history of Israel. But the problem we have with that is that cypress may not have been common in the time of Noah. Noah lived before the flood, and the pre-flood world was probably very different from ours today, and many trees and plants have gone extinct since the time of Noah. For all we know, gopher wood is some kind of extinct tree that was commonly used in the time of the dinosaurs. Furthermore, we don't even know where Noah lived or if cypress was even available to him. Gopher wood could also be a wood that was treated or shaped in a certain way. Some scholars believe that gopher wood simply means pitch treated wood or squared wood. Regardless, we can't be sure what gopher wood was, but it was likely that gopher wood wasn't so strong that it was difficult to work with, or so weak that it would cause the boat to come apart in the open ocean. So we know that it's possible to build a giant wooden ship with Bronze Age technology, but was Noah even smart enough to build the ship, let alone the people of his time? Well, many people say that Noah was an unskilled caveman. They say that because according to the genealogy as described by the Bible, Noah would have lived in the times of the caveman. The fact is, people with differing technological abilities can live in the same time period. One great example is the American Indians during the 1800s. The American Indians were still living as hunter-gatherers while the Civil War was underway with factories and steam engines. Poor guys didn't stand a chance when the Americans kicked them out of their land. So if cavemen did exist in that time, they could have easily coexisted with a more developed world, like hunter-gatherers do today. But that's not even the biggest problem with that statement. From Adam to Noah, about 1,600 years had passed. That's 1,600 years of technology and knowledge. And that technology would have advanced even faster with the average lifespan of a person being way over 500 years. When people are living over 500 years, not only will people be able to learn and innovate more, but there will be more people to learn and invent new technologies, assuming they're not dying a lot. So it's not too far-fetched to believe that the technology that Noah had at the time was as advanced as the ancient Greeks or even the Romans. Noah himself may have been a skilled shipbuilder, carpenter, or even an architect, as he was about 500 years old when he started building the ark. That's a lot of knowledge. Upon further thought, it's unlikely that Noah wasn't skilled, because in some ways he is a mirror of Jesus Christ. The ark had only one door to be saved from the great flood, and Jesus Christ is the only door to salvation. Jesus was likely a carpenter, and we know that carpenters work with wood. Noah was tasked with building a large wooden ark, so it would make sense if he was very skilled in carpentry as well. But that's where we come to the next obstacle. Just because Noah could build a giant boat doesn't mean the ark could float or hold structure. Can a boat really be built as large as Noah's ark? Well, in Genesis chapter 6 verse 15, God tells us the size of the ark. This is how you shall make it. The length of the ark, 300 cubits. Its breadth, 50 cubits. Its height, 30 cubits. In Hebrew, there are two cubits, two versions of the cubit. The short cubit, about 17.5 inches, and the long cubit, about 20 inches. If we use the short cubit, the ark would be about 440 feet long. And if we use the long cubit, the ark would be about 510 feet long. When building large structures, the long cubit was typically used. And since we want to push the limits of the ark, we're going to go with the larger and the more likely size, which means it would be about 85 feet wide and 51 feet tall as well. But are there any wooden ships in history that have been that big? Yes, there have been. If we go to 1909, we find a large schooner called the Wyoming. It was about 450 feet long and about 50 feet wide, but it had a very noticeable problem. While sailing, it would twist in every direction. It often experienced leaks, and in March 1924 it sank, killing everybody on board. Because of this, many people say a ship as large as the ark would not be able to float for very long, but they often leave out the fact that the Wyoming carried 6,000 tons of coal back and forth for about 15 years. The ark was only afloat for 5 months. Not only that, but we can reasonably assume that the ark had a stronger structure, because it turns out the ancients were much better at building wooden boats than 19th century New England shipbuilders. About 500 years earlier, in about AD 1400, the Chinese built a very large imperial ship called a treasure ship. According to the original ancient Chinese records, the ship was an astonishing 450 feet long and 200 feet wide. That is 4 times bigger than the Wyoming. But some scholars say that the ship couldn't possibly be that large because of what happened to the Wyoming. Besides the incredible accuracy of ancient Chinese records, there are several structures in the treasure ship that gave it a structural advantage over the Wyoming. One of those structures is called the bulkhead. A bulkhead is a watertight wall that went from one side of the ship to another. The treasure ship would have had a series of bulkheads that would not only make the boat stiffer and more resistant to stress, but it also helped protect against leaks. The Chinese also used multiple layers of planking, which would have helped even more to resist stress and prevent leaks. But much of the technology that made the treasure ship so formidable were already invented in the 12th century, about 780 years before the Wyoming. In other words, it would have been possible to build a treasure ship in the 12th century, but nobody was rich enough to actually complete the project until 1400 AD. The Chinese also built a 600 by 600 foot floating castle. They would use it as a river fortress to take on their enemies, but it was probably built using a different method, and it also had a different purpose from a treasure ship, but I think it's still worth mentioning. But we can go even older. In about 200 BC, 2,100 years before the Wyoming, the Greek warship Tessaraconteres set sail. Though it was almost worthless as a warship, it was a great sign of the king's power, because this inexpensive ship was about 420 feet long and 57 feet wide. What's interesting about this ship is that it didn't have bulkheads to reinforce the hull. So how did the boat resist stress and prevent from twisting? Well, the Tessaraconteres didn't have as many sails, if any, compared to the Wyoming. The many sails and the higher center of mass caused even more stress to the Wyoming. Stress the Greek warship didn't have to deal with. In addition, the Greeks probably used more layers of planking, more layers of wood, like the Chinese. The main reason why ancient ships were built better than the Wyoming is because the people building the Wyoming weren't trying to build a long-lasting, high-quality boat. That was not their intention. The boats the shipbuilders were making had to be constructed as fast and as cheap as possible, including the Wyoming. And when you try to build something cheap and fast, you often overlook certain things, and the problems you do find you choose to ignore. The shipbuilders also actively chose to use low quality and weaker materials so they could save money building the boat. In fact, the life expectancy of a cargo ship of that style was 10 to 15 years, and 15 years is how long the Wyoming lasted. With all that said, it's unsurprisingly possible to build Noah's Ark. But what about the rest of the story? Is the ark big enough to store all the animals? Could he have had enough food to feed the animals? How did he remove all the waste from the animals? Well, we'll be talking about that and much more in the next video. God bless and have an amazing day.